Wait for it, and we're live! Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Lunch and Learn. We are still behind the camera. Well, we're always behind the camera, but we're still doing it on Zoom this week for COVID safety. But next week, all being well, we'll be back in person, stuffing our faces with bagels that have all been dripped in sanitizer to keep everyone nice and safe. But for this week, we are going to be online, and we are going to. What's that?
It has to go green. It told you.
So to start us off today, we're going to talk about the parasha for a couple of minutes, and then we'll dive into Pirkei Avot. So this week's parasha is Chaye Sarah, if I'm not mistaken. And Chaye Sarah picks up the story immediately after the previous episode, which was at the end of Vayera, which was the story of the Akedah, of Avraham taking Isaac to, by God's instruction, needless to say, to be offered up as a sacrifice. And so the result of that shock of Sarah finding out about what was going on was apparently enough to cause her to die. So the beginning of Parashat Chaye Sarah picks up with the death of Sarah and Avraham having to secure the plot of land in the cave of Machpelah, which we know is in Hebron. And so the beginning of the parasha talks about the negotiations that take place with Abraham trying to secure this plot of land to be able to bury his wife. And then immediately after that, we have the story of Abraham trying to find a wife for his son, Isaac. So he dispatches Eliezer to go and find a wife. Interestingly, to pick up on is the very important point, which Paul, if I'm not mistaken, Chief Rabbi mentions in his Torah this week, about the importance that is stressed on finding a wife who is kind and considerate and full of chesed. So there's particular, Jewish attributes that Avraham is encouraging to be looked for in a wife for Isaac. So Eliezer sets out, and he encounters Rivka. He encounters Rebecca, who he deems as a worthy shidduch. And then we have the story of him and Rivka's father and Rivka's brother. Rivka's father was Betuel, and her brother was Lavan. So the encounter between Eliezer and the family to try and seal the deal. At which point they go back, and Yitzchak meets Rivka, and they become husband and wife. And then the end of the parasha details the subsequent offspring that Avraham had with Keturah, who, if I'm not mistaken, is Hagar again. But I think it's Hagar after she did Teshuvah, after she repented. And then the end of the parasha lists the 12 descendants of Yishmael. And for more on Yishmael and the Jewish people, do check out the bigger picture, week 4 of Parashat Lech Lecha. So that's a little bit on this week's parasha, Parashat Chaye Sarah. Just one very small idea in honor of the Chief Rabbi's Yortzeit, Chief Rabbi Sachs, who we had Yortzeit for yesterday. Was it yesterday?
Yeah. Oh, get the days wrong. No, the day before.
Day before, Wednesday. Yes, that's right. It was on Wednesday. No, that wasn't. I'm completely bamboozled by the way the days have gone this week. But it was this week, nonetheless. You're right. I think it was a couple of days ago. So it's very interesting because on this week's parasha we have Avraham struggling with life after he lost his wife, and I was watching a I was watching a Torah class online. I also like to tune in to other people's Torah classes, just like you do. So I was watching a rabbi called Ephraim Goldberg, who is a rabbi in Boca Raton in Florida, and he hosted Rabbi Sachs in his community back in 2018, and he decided that he was going to just interview Rabbi Sachs in a casual conversation in his office. He was going to record it for posterity, and he didn't really think too much of it until Chief Rabbi Sachs passed away last year, and then he realized he had this rare recording of this conversation, and he released it as part of his regular series of interviews. And in the conversation that he had with Chief Rabbi Sachs, I'm trying to remember it all now because I was listening to it, I didn't get the chance to write it down, but he asked Rabbi Sachs, has he ever had struggles with his faith, and if so, how did he approach those struggles? And the chief rabbi replied to him and said he has never struggled with his faith in Hashem, but he has often struggled with his faith in other people. And I guess when you encounter situations throughout history where people have done horrendous and horrific things, he struggled more with that than struggling with Hashem. And he said the reason why he had this kind of self-assurance and conviction is because of this week's parsha, where you have Avraham, who has been promised to have children, and he's been promised that those children are going to become a great and mighty nation, and they're going to inherit the land, and what he is faced with seems to fly completely in the face of that. The challenges that he encounters, in this week's parsha, he loses. In towards the end of last week and the beginning of this week, he's got this one son who he is told to go and sacrifice. So you'd think that Abraham would be sitting there thinking, hang on a minute, the maths doesn't add up here. You've promised me that I'm going to have children, and you've promised me that they're going to inherit the land, but now you're telling me that I have to go and kill my child. And then not only that, but he loses his wife immediately afterwards, and the math doesn't add up again, because how is he supposed to have loads of children if that's the case? And how are we supposed to be inheriting the land over here? So at this great moment of adversity, where nothing seems to be playing out as it would seem to have been promised, you would think that would be the moment that he collapses and that he throws in the towel. And yet you see that the parsha goes on to talk about how the very next thing that happens is that he goes and secures this plot of land, ownership of at least part of the land of Israel. And then the next scenario after that is he goes and sorts out a wife for his son, and that then can start the process of creating these descendants. And so Chief Rabbi Sachs basically realized from here that Abraham's reaction is not just to collapse and to give up and throw in the towel and channel all of his aggression and all of his anger at Hashem. It's completely the opposite. He realizes that the imperative is on him to do something about the situation that he finds himself in, and to lift himself up and pick himself up and push on and crack on. And so no sooner does he have this barrage of challenges, but he's able to pick himself up, dust himself off, and continue on that journey and continue on that process to actually bring about the things which had been promised to him in the first place. So the chief rabbi basically said, anytime that he encounters a situation where he feels like, what are the options over here? Situations where people may typically react and just lose their faith in the Almighty, lose their faith in everything that is possible. he says these are the moments where you have to realize that God has faith in us, and God is counting on us, and God is expecting us to be able to take those steps and to be able to push forward and fight forward. And he said that gives him tremendous amounts of chizuk and motivation. And I thought it was quite inspiring, and I hope it inspires you guys as well. If you just give me 10 seconds, I'm going to close a window because you guys can hear the builders next door. But if you've got any comments or questions, shout them out. I'm not hearing any comments or questions.
One question, may I?
Yep.
Sorry. In lots of stories that we hear or see over the centuries, I think, it always looks as though the Akedah, when Abraham is to sacrifice Isaac, Isaac is shown as a small child or a medium-sized child. And yet, obviously, he's not. He's a young man.
He was 37.
Do we know how old he was? Is there any indication?
Of how old he was?
Yes, because he gets married immediately after.
He was 37.
He was 37. I thought that.
He was 37 at the time of the Akedah, when his father took him up to sacrifice him on a mountain. And I'm 36, so Dad, what have we got planned for my birthday next year, hey? All right. So yeah,
he is a strange thing, wasn't it, for him to be asked to prove what was in his heart, that he had this love for God, and that God would ask him to sacrifice his 38-year-old son. I mean, it's a little bit unlikely unless one looks very closely. And when you look at what Rabbi Sachs puts in about this, I think he struggles with this tremendously, because he comes out finally by saying that it was all to do with children are not yours as items, as articles of wealth. Up to then, whatever the father said the child must do, the child must do. And they could sell the child, they could do all sorts of, but in that age. And he comes out with this, that no, it was to show that they couldn't, that there was a separation. But it shows how much he must have struggled with this bit to get to such an obscure explanation of what is a very strange piece of puzzle.
Quite possibly, but we do have to dig deep to be able to see the goings on and the situation, and that can take a lot of time to comprehend. Why shouldn't it? I actually encountered a very interesting Kabbalistic insight into the Akedah recently, and it's interesting. It seems to be, and we're not using this as a way of tackling wider and broader issues, but it seems to be that it is spiritually possible for a male to be born with a female soul, whatever that means, right? Whatever that might mean. It seems to be spiritually possible for this to occur, right? The result of that is that, apparently, again, I don't understand this stuff well at all, but the result of that would then impede that person from being able to father children. So the insight that I heard about this week is that Yitzchak was apparently born with a female soul, rendering him incapable of having children. Abraham would not have known this necessarily. So to be commanded to take your child or to take your son and sacrifice him on a mountain, and again to be faced with that challenge from Hashem, where you're like, I don't understand a couple of things over here, God, I could pick you up on. We have to appreciate that Abraham didn't pick him up on any of this and dutifully listened to the request from Hashem to take his son to the mountain, right? But you could forgive him for thinking the following: hang on a minute, God, there's a few things over here. Number one, you don't want me to kill people I thought this was like a universal thing. I thought we just don't murder people, full stop. I definitely thought we don't murder children. I definitely thought we don't sacrifice children to God. So this is catching me a bit off left field over here, right? Number one. Number two, you've promised me that I'm going to have a nation through Isaac who's going to inherit the land. And now you're telling me to kill Isaac. That kind of flies in the face of your logic, doesn't it? Right? So he's got these... you've got these illogical points to be made about this instruction, and yet he goes and he does it. But spiritually, it seems what happened was the moment of where of this Akedah, of binding him down and potentially about to slaughter him or whatever, that apparently caused his female soul to depart from his body, and then a male soul came into his body. Right? So actually, the very instruction that he was given was the thing that allowed him to subsequently father children. So this episode where he's being challenged of like cutting off all the chances of God's promises actually happening, it was that very episode that allowed and paved the way for the blessings to come into Isaac's life. So it's a deep and it's a complex topic, and it's not as straightforward as, oh, what a cruel, vindictive, evil God that he would tell someone to sacrifice his little boy, right? Which is often, when you read the story, that's what we sometimes think, and that's why I hear a lot of people say, like, what kind of God would allow a father or tell a father to go and sacrifice? Well, that was exactly the point, and so you have to spend time learning and deepening your understanding of the topic to be able to see what might have been going on. Okay, Rita, you've got a question as well. Welcome also to Claudia. Welcome back. Lovely to have you on. And to Morris as well. Hello. Over to you, Rita.
Welcome, Rabbi.
I just wanted to be ignorant here because I don't understand. Did he sacrifice his son or he didn't?
The simple reading of the text is that Abraham did not sacrifice his son. The angel stopped him just in time.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
And that's supposed to the thing you just explained before.
And the angel stopped him just in time, and as a result of that, Abraham ended up sacrificing a ram, which was caught in a nearby bush. And he sacrificed the ram instead. And that is why we blow a ram's horn on Rosh Hashanah, because when we blow the shofar, so it reminds God, look at how dedicated your people are, because they were literally ready to cut off everything because you asked him to, and look how amazing your people are. So that's the origin of that story over there.
Thank you.
A pleasure. All right, gang. Martin's only got like 5 minutes left now, so let's get ourselves onto there we go. The Mishnah. Here we go. So we are on chapter 5, Mishnah 20, which hopefully everybody can see over there. So we are
very small. It's
very
small. Yes, too small to read.
What if I go like that?
That's better.
If you switch to speaker's view, it'll come up bigger.
Yeah. Mine is clear.
If I spotlight myself, then you can see it.
It's okay now.
It's quite clear.
Lovely. So, says the Mishnah, last week we were talking about love, and this week we're talking about machloikes. We're talking about arguments. So does anyone want to read us the English text, please?
Shall I do it?
Over to you, Joy.
Well, I don't know whether to put my glasses on or take them off. Every dispute that is for the sake of heaven will in the end endure, but one that is not for the sake of heaven will not endure. Which is the controversy that is for the sake of heaven? Such was the controversy of Hillel and Shammai. And which is the controversy that is not for the sake of heaven? Such was the controversy of Korah. and all his congregation.
Thank you very much. So, we have got machloikes. Hands up if you've ever had a machloikes or a broigus. Well, maybe we don't want to hear about your broiguses. But disputes, disagreements, they are a part of life. We don't always agree with each other. Sometimes we disagree on very important things, and sometimes we disagree on very petty things. You know, is it healthy to ever disagree?
It depends what it is.
Depends what you're disagreeing on, right?
Depends who with as well.
It depends who with.
Yeah, the wife is correct. I don't even know what she's going to say, but she is correct.
Yeah.
It's like that joke, isn't it? I made the arrangement with my wife when we got married that I'm going to make all of the big decisions and she's going to make all the little decisions. And so far, after all these years of marriage, I've never had to make a big decision.
Excellent. And then she said to me, when she wants to know my opinion, she'll let me know what it is.
That's it.
Or my wife, I always have the last word when arguing with my wife. It's yes, dear.
Yeah.
Correct.
So we've all been there in some way, shape, or form. And this Mishnah is playing into that.
Torah in this or last week's Sedra says, listen to your wife. It's specifically in terms. It says to Abraham, listen to your wife.
Absolutely. So,
Thank you, Lord.
It doesn't say do what she says.
It's implied. It's implied. Listen, implied.
So obviously our Mishnah is not just talking about discussions or listening to our wives, although that will be certainly the fact that we have such close relationships with our spouses inevitably will mean that we have occasions when we have to discuss and we don't always see eye to eye. And it's important for people to be able to have healthy arguments and healthy disagreements. Because, I mean, some of the positive sides to disagreements is that things become clearer afterwards. You can clarify different issues in broader terms, perhaps in the terms that the Mishnah is coming from. You know, without machlokes, without the ability to discuss and to see things from opposite sides, we won't ever get clarity on what halacha should be. We won't always have clarity on how things should work and how things should operate and how we should behave. So there are very positive outgrowths of disagreement that can be beneficial. And when disagreements are conducted civilly, then there can be great benefit. And that is what the Mishnah at its heart is really trying to tell us, that when people are coming from a good place, then the disagreement, the conflict, the dispute, it will endure. What that means, we have to also discuss. But when it's not l'shem shamayim, when it's not for the right reasons, the right motive, not for the sake of whatever l'shem shamayim might mean, and we can discuss that and hear from you guys what you think that means, then it's not a good situation. Then it brings us two examples of what a l'shem shamayim machlokes is and what it isn't. So the disagreement that it brings as the example is Hillel and Shammai, and we'll talk about them in a minute. And the machlokes, which was not l'shem shamayim, which was not healthy, which was not conducive to growth, is the example of Korach and his entourage. If you remember, Korach is the one that contested Moses and Aaron for the leadership over the Jewish people, and it did not end well. He had 250 followers. They ended up getting swallowed by the ground. So it did not end well, this machlokes that was not l'shem shamayim. So yeah, what do we guys think?
Well, the problem with Korach's dispute was that he wasn't genuinely arguing for the sake of, he wanted to promote himself to the position. If his argument was, look, I'm not 100% certain you are the right man, and let's have a talk about it. And it may be somebody else, but he wanted him. That's why it was for his own self-grandishment, not for the benefit of the community at large. So I assume, and Hillel and Shammai argued vehemently with each other, but it was to ensure which is the right way. And when it was decided, the other one followed. Exactly.
So let's just spend a minute or so on looking at these characters over here. So so the example of a positive machlokes, of a l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, disagreement, is Hillel and Shammai. What was special about Hillel and Shammai? So they are constantly disagreeing with each other across the whole of the Talmud. There are hundreds of occasions where either they disagreed fundamentally as the elders, or where their academies disagreed. And so we have the disagreements between Hillel and Shammai, which there are only a handful, but then we have countless disagreements between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, of the academies, the yeshivas of these two great individuals, and they are often sitting on different sides of the argument. But why, therefore, are we bringing them as our paradigm, as our example? And the reason for that is because even though they disagreed, and they were off so many occasions on completely the opposite side, they were complete allies. And the students of these two academies were still able to not only just interact in healthy ways with each other, but they even managed to create shidduchim between sons or daughters from one academy and sons or daughters from the other. So even though there were so many things that they disagreed on when it came to Jewish law, they were nonetheless able to live in harmony side by side, even to the point of marrying each other. And not only that, but they were always ready to retract. So sometimes a person can be so gung-ho and so stuck in their ways and stuck in their opinion that they can never ever see the other side, and they won't entertain that the other side might be correct. And that wasn't the case with Hillel and Shammai, and it wasn't the case with Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, their academies. They were always ready to take that step back if indeed they reflected and realized that they were in the wrong. It's also quite special, quite unique, because we have a principle that, with the exception of, I think, six halachot, in every other instance across halacha, we always have a rule that the halacha sides like Hillel, except I think in 6 instances. So in all of the other hundreds or whatever, dozens and dozens of instances, the halacha is always like Hillel, except for 6. And yet, despite the fact that you've got this principle in place, it never stopped them from having, first of all, positive relationships, but it also never stopped them from continuing to discuss respectfully backwards and forwards, trying to find what the truth is, trying to get to the depth of what the MS was. And that was l'shem shamayim. They were trying to uncover and reveal what the true will of Hashem in this world was. And so that was their disagreement. They were often on opposite sides, but they were always able to have these discussions for the right reasons, for the purpose of striving for truth and revealing what Hashem's will is in the world. Joe, did you have your hand up?
No, I was just going to say they were searching for truth. You just said it.
I was getting there.
I understood the whole point of it was that once they come to a conclusion with the input of other houses, other rabbanim, once the halacha was set, they followed it, even if it was different to what they originally said. Right. That was the whole point. They were able to accept the majority view as to what the halacha is.
Very good.
Were they contemporaries?
Yeah, Hillel and Shammai most certainly, yeah. And then their students as well. Yeah, very much so. They were sitting in the Beit Midrash together, slugging it out. So there we go. I was going to say as well that what was I going to say? So I've got a note here from the Rambam from Maimonides, who says, forgive me if I'm not making myself clear here, I can't remember exactly what I was writing. The constructive outcome means that even if the view is not adopted, it will be remembered and discussed. I think what I'm trying to ascertain over here is what it means to be l'shem shamayim. So, because the Mishnah says that a machlokes, which is l'shem shamayim, sofa lehiskayem, it will have. I've got it translated there. It will have a constructive outcome. It will endure. What does it mean that it will endure? So the Rambam says that even if the view is not adopted, it will be remembered and discussed. He says that the litmus test for determining if something is l'shem shamayim is whether it reaches a point of resolution. Does the resolution endure? So sometimes we get into disagreements, discussions, and arguments, and we take contrary positions, but we keep revisiting those same positions over and over and over again. So even though we could be presented with all the facts, and even though there could be enough to chew on to be able to form a solid conclusion, if we are tainting the discussion with our own bias, as it were, we're not really trying to plumb the depths. So then the argument keeps needing to be revisited. It never gets resolved. So the sofa lehit kayem means that it is resolved. It will be adopted as one way or the other, but it won't be that people constantly try and revisit it again and don't accept defeat, as it were, in inverted commas, that people just try and constantly resurface and dig up old disagreements. So if it's l'shem shamayim, if we're trying to find the truth, if we're trying to find a way of comprehending whatever it might be, then eventually we will be honest enough and mature enough to accept that this is the conclusion of the argument. But if we just constantly can't see eye to eye or refuse to see eye to eye because we are blemishing the argument in some way with our own bias, then it will keep resurfacing and keep revisiting, which is not l'shem shamayim.
Rita. I've got a question. Every dispute, that is for the sake of heaven. So it means anything we argue about is okay. Is that what it means? Because it's every dispute.
So every disagreement, every argument, every discussion, right, can either be l'shem shamayim or not l'shem shamayim. If I'm just trying to wind someone up, right, so that's not l'shem shamayim. If I'm trying to have a healthy discussion with someone, and this actually brings me on to a question that I wanted to ask, which is the difference between a discussion and an argument. Right? What's the difference between a discussion where people are taking two sides and discussing them and an argument? So that's going to have an impact on the type of conversations that we find ourselves having.
It's different because when you've got an argument, you're angry. When you've got a discussion, You say, what do you think about it? And what
arguments are disagreement, whereas discussion.
That's definitely one. That's definitely one difference, right? Argument for us denotes a level of anger when we're in the heat of the moment. Anyone else want to weigh in on the differences between a discussion and an argument?
I think an argument is where somebody has an opinion which they're not prepared to. They don't really want to hear another side. Whereas with Hillel and Shammai, each one had a position, but he had the the temerity to say to somebody just as learned or more, am I right? What do you think? What's your opinion? And that's a discussion. I don't know whether I reached the right decision, so let me hear what you have to say, and then I'll come to a conclusion. Whereas an argument is where you, to some extent, bang the table and say, this is what is right.
So it seems that Claudia also agrees with you, because Claudia weighed in over there in the chat and said it depends on the difference is the ability to hear and to listen.
Yeah.
So I think that's thinking along similar lines. Peter, were you going to say something?
If it's holding up Hillel and Shammai, it's the right way to do it. Why does it say such was the controversy of Hillel and Shammai?
Because controversies, disputes, arguments, these are all loaded words with our own stereotypes. But fundamentally, it is possible for two people to be on completely the opposite side of the fence and to be able to engage in a respectful and truthful way. And it's still conflict, and it's still controversy, and it's still dispute, and it's still argument. But it is being done from a standpoint of maturity and acceptance and patience and tolerance and trying to strive to the depths of the truth. Rabbi Sachs, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, also talks about the difference between discussions or conversations and arguments. And I remember hearing him say many years ago that along similar lines, that a conversation or a discussion is two people who are able to hold opposing views, and they are able to talk, and they are able to discuss, and they are able to listen, as Claudia was mentioning as well. And then even if they don't agree, or that they don't concede, they've at least heard and weighed up and reflected on what they have heard. They might still disagree at the end of it, but they've been able to hold a mature, civilized discussion. Argument, says Rabbi Sachs, is when you can have two people on opposing sides, and it doesn't matter what facts, what statistics, what information you present, they will never change their mind. They will never change their mind, which is it's a terrible example. It doesn't.
Why?
Why is it so?
A terrible example? Because surely at the end of the day, see, I've always understood this to be something reasonably different. If you believe in something, if you have faith in something, for somebody else to be able to do as many arguments as they like, but if you really genuinely believe that as being the correct way of either doing this or whatever the argument is, but you genuinely believe that, and then your argument is for the sake of Hashem, then that's perfectly okay for you to hold that. You do not need
I think
to change your opinion.
I think Rabbi Sachs was trying to say that when you start the conversation, you've already concluded where you want to be at the end of it.
Yeah.
Right?
But if you,
so in an argument, if I remember him correctly, in an argument, you're basically approaching it with, I don't care what they tell me, I'm not going to change one iota at the end of it. So I'm not sure that I had faithfully represented what he was saying, because it's a long time ago that I heard it. But it's the difference between approaching a conversation where you want to hear and reflect on what the other person is saying, and when you are going into the discussion, conversation, argument where I've got my position, you've got your position, we're just going to talk for a little bit, and at the end of it, you'll go your way, I'll go my way. And that's not healthy debate. That's not healthy discussion.
Well, I think I agree with Paul, because one of my grandsons is atheist, right? And he just keeps, I don't discuss it with him often, but he obviously, he's stuck in his position. But it isn't wrong for me to be stuck in mine, because I have my faith. So I won't be shaken from my faith. So
absolutely.
Whatever he says,
tell you that you're wrong.
Yes, whatever he says, whatever he says doesn't shake me, because I know before I start, I know I have that faith. I've always had it, And he doesn't, he's just atheist. He doesn't believe in anything. He explains all the Darwinism and all the science and all the other things. And I just listen. But, you know, I won't be shaken, but neither will he. I'm not trying to persuade him. I never try to persuade him. But occasionally we have these discussions. But I know from the outset that whatever he says is not going to make any difference to me.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends what's in your heart. And I believe at the end of the day, Hashem knows what's in your heart. And if you're having an argument for the sake of God, for good reason, for reasons which are honorable and correct, Hashem knows what's in your heart. And that conversation, or whatever it is, you shouldn't be swayed if you think what you think, and it's logical to you and you believe it, then I don't think Hashem would want you to change just because, well, actually, we've had a discussion, you really need to come to this open-minded. And I go so far, Rabbi, as to suggest that you have many, many beliefs which could not be shaken if there was an earthquake in front of you. You would still carry on with your belief. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that belief. So I'm not sure that he would argue that you should always have that. I don't think he would put forward that both arguments are always as valid as each other.
It's
Okay,
interesting.
you can't go into any discussion.
While you were saying that, it occurred to me that a lot of the discussions and conversations that we have, right, it's possible that one side of it could be coming l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, and the other person is not coming l'shem shamayim. So is that a machlokes l'shem shamayim or a machlokes that's not l'shem shamayim? I would think that in order for a machlokes, for a discussion, a conversation, an argument to be l'shem shamayim, it means that both sides are approaching the argument because they are both operating l'shem shamayim.
I believe you only have to worry about what's in your heart.
Yes.
What you are saying you believe, fundamentally believe, is correct.
That's fine.
If that's the case, then why would you, for goodness sake, why would you want to change? And if the other person is saying something which he fundamentally believes is correct, I wouldn't really expect him to change. But it doesn't really matter. It's only a personal issue between you and Hashem. But Hashem knows what's in your heart. And if you're arguing for something you really believe in deeply, great, go for it.
But then that would be a machlokes l'shem shamayim, wouldn't it?
Yes,
that would be a discussion. That would be a conversation.
Two people have to be like that, and I don't believe two people. I don't believe that two people have to start with equivalent arguments. They are both worthy. No, they may not be worthy. I have no idea what is in somebody else's mind, or whether they're just being argumentative or whatever. It's not my job to understand that. My job is to think.
Yeah, what we're doing now is change mind, because we're having a conversation, we're having a discussion and an argument, don't fundamentally agree with one or two things, but we're doing it to further understand this, what we're studying. So it's kind of encapsulates it, really, doesn't it?
Yes.
Which is why we enjoy doing it every week.
Yeah.
So, Martin.
The other thing you haven't mentioned, Rabbi, I may have just mentioned one other area. I think it's great having an argument with other people. What about when you want to have an argument with Hashem?
What about it?
Good question.
Well,
Can't really, can you?
to me,
Isn't an argument with Hashem
Judaism, yes, to me, in Judaism absolutely insists that you take nothing as being, it is this way, therefore it is this way. Actually, everything that Judaism teaches is, if it isn't in a correct way, then it is your duty to try and throw some light onto that subject to make it more as you would believe. And so having an argument with Hashem is not only good, it's absolutely essential. Because there may be things that we are not clever enough, because we're human, to understand, and that would cause us to have either blind faith, which I don't think is doing that well at the moment. When you look at blind faith as Muslims, yes, taking blind faith doesn't seem to be a great way forward. So Judaism surely is about trying to understand as best as we can, not that we can put ourselves Hashem's ways are different to our ways, but as best as we can. And if something fundamentally is happening that is bad, we should be able to argue. And I think that is a very Jewish, also for the sake of Hashem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You probably hate that.
Beautifully said.
Don't you?
Yeah, that's
Pardon?
right.
Would you sort
You
of
can't tell someone that they
Completely
would
agree.
do this or think that. That's wrong.
I completely agree. It's interesting. As you were saying that, it reminded me of another Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. I think we've seen it already, which is that when you have got two people talking and they're talking words of Torah, then the Shekhinah is resting between them.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Which means that any time that we're having a machlokes, then any time that we are having a machlokes l'shem Shemaim, Hashem is right there in the room with us. So we're always arguing with Hashem as well, because he's right there. He's right in the thick of it. So
it is very rare, though, that we talk like this, that we allow people and validate people, that if something is happening in your life or something is inexplicable or whatever the reason is, and you have a problem, that actually it is okay to argue the toss with Hashem. It is okay. Is that there's no problem with, you might not get a very sensible answer because you don't know what the answer is. There's no one to give you an answer. But actually, fundamental of saying, I'm not really that happy with that idea, is okay. And maybe it is something we should talk more about within our community. That there is a responsible, that it is that life, that if Hashem is doing all these things with eyes open, which we can only assume he absolutely is, then that's fine. I don't want half the world not to have supper tonight. I don't understand that. I really don't. And we've had this before, and you have said rightly so that if we all follow the Torah, if we all did all the things that we should do, there's more than enough for everybody. But there isn't, because actually
I think even Andrew Neil. So I recall Andrew Neil saying that the other night as well, along similar lines. I can't remember what he. I can't
Forgive
remember.
me, I was unable to get there. So.
No, but it is online, by the way, Paul. It is.
Oh,
there
great!
Okay. Oh, okay.
I'll put the link up on Lunch and Learn shortly.
It seems to me there are many things.
Yes, I'll be interested. Yeah.
Many things. Starvation, poverty, disease.
Yeah, you say why?
So many things that I can't agree are a good idea. Maybe because I'm not clever enough to understand it, and I get that. But it doesn't mean I dictate it.
I think that's quite the way what Rabbi Sachs was saying as well. That things like that, it can make you lose your faith in man, but it didn't make him lose his faith in God.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
People who went through all the camps and the war and everything else, some people lost it after the war, and some people just remained in their faith. So, they were angry with God. Where was God? But then again, we had this conversation before.
It's not answerable. You can't. There's no answer.
No, because it's not God.
But it doesn't mean you can't ask the question.
Absolutely, you've got to be able to ask. There's no such thing as a bad question. But I think perhaps part of what this Mishnah is encouraging us to reflect on is how much do we want to hear an answer? How much are we open to then hearing that other side? I'll share with you a couple of other little nuggets on this Mishnah. One is just to go back to Korach for a minute. So in my notes over here, I've written that Korach is the prime example of a dispute with no lasting benefit. He was driven by base motives, by jealousy, by illusions of grandeur, by lust for power, by personal animosities. And as a result of all of these different components, he becomes the paradigm and the prototype and the prime example of a machlokes that's not for the sake of heaven. So in any discussions, disagreements, arguments, especially with people who are extremely close to us, it's always important for us to be aware in our own selves of what it is that's driving us to take a contrary position to somebody else. When we get upset about something, are we getting upset because it's the principle of the thing? Are we getting upset because my honor has been slighted? Are we getting upset because I'm jealous of the person? That something's not gone my way, that I don't have control, that I dislike this person? What's driving the real reason for me being so upset about something or for taking this contrary position? So those are very important questions for us to consider in our own lives, because we can sometimes get completely blinded to the damage that we can cause with our disagreements. And they might not always be for the right reasons. They may never have been necessary in the first place. The damage that Korach did to his family and to Bnei Israel, and the way in which he is now forever remembered, probably wasn't a good idea for him to do it in the first place, right? But how many people do we know that have fallen out with their families because of a slight to their honor, or because they looked at them the wrong way at their daughter's wedding, whatever it is. And perhaps so many of these conflicts could be resolved if people just came at it from a better angle. Joe, you have a question on that?
Well, when you are hurt by anything, it's usually not you that are deeply hurt, it's your ego that is hurt.
Interesting.
But yes, Oda, when you're looking at the tree, because everything comes through your ego, and that's what's hurt. But if you dissect it, you're not deeply hurt inside, it's your ego that's hurt. You understand what I'm saying? But your ego is only the first door to your inner workings, as it were. So it's the ego. It's the ego that's hurt.
Rabbi, does this cover arguments between man and man, as you just described? I've always felt that this only covered arguments, if they are between man and man, which are about Hashem. They're arguments for the sake of God.
Well, the Mishnah says
the argument about whether I don't like my auntie anymore because she looked at me a bit leftwise, that isn't an argument about the sake of God.
So
I don't really get sort of quite where this is coming from. It's a different view.
I would say that the Mishnah says kol machlokes. It says all arguments, any argument, any dispute, that if you are doing it for the right reasons, then it's viewed in a good way. If you are doing it for bad reasons, then it's viewed in a bad way. It could well be that pardon me?
Any argument, regardless of whether it is, it's quite a tough one to say every argument should be judged upon whether it is for the sake of God. Every argument, before you have it, after you've had it, during you have it, you have to measure it, if you like, you're suggesting, by whether it meets the criteria of being for the sake of Hashem. Tough one. I'd never thought of it like that. I'm sure you're right, and so I have learnt a lot today.
It's a lifelong thing. We don't always get it right straight off the bat, but I don't see why it shouldn't be the case. Because if we have an argument amongst our family or our friends, where I'm trying to impose my will because of along what Joe was saying, because that's what my ego needs, that's what my pride needs. That's not a great position to be coming from.
But it's also not. There must be a point. No, I think what I'm saying is, can you invoke God's will to use it as the measure of your right or wrong within the discussion? It's surely we're getting a little bit of fundamentalism here. I'm only arguing with it. I don't like brown shoes you're wearing, and I don't like them, but I'm sure Hashem's not keen on them either. So I'm actually in the change shoes.
You can't invoke God's will.
You just can't. I don't see how you.
It's interesting.
That's why you're a rabbi and I'm not, because you, I'm sure, are correct. But I'm having a slight difficulty in thinking that all of us are going to be able to leave here today at 1:05, and from now on, everything will be judged on that invoking of Hashem's name.
No.
I do hear what you're saying. I think I need to reflect on it deeper. But I think fundamentally what we're being asked to do is I don't think we're invoking. Well, I can see why you're saying it, but I don't think every argument is about destroying the other side and just writing off the argument by saying, yes, this is what Hashem wants. Hashem does not want us to have pasta for dinner tonight. Hashem wants us to have pizza for dinner tonight. I don't think it's quite like that, but I would say it's more that if what you are saying is being driven by your own personal agenda and you're therefore not being sensitive to the impact of what this disagreement, where it's going to take you, then you're not really aspiring to lofty goals and trying to achieve. I would put it like this: you're not necessarily trying to achieve, a godly result, a result that Hashem would be proud of. If we know that Hashem, above all, wants us to live in peace and in harmony, especially with our loved ones, then if we purposely engage in an argument where at the end of it we're refusing to talk to each other, that I would say is an example of a machlokes that Hashem probably doesn't want. He doesn't want us to ignore each other, slam the door, smash the plates, and all the rest of it. And so we have to manage our expectations and manage our tempers and manage our temperaments,
opinions,
and perhaps our opinions, and think about how best to engage in these conversations or in these arguments, in these disputes, because there's a lot at stake, and that's the point. You can see what's at stake by these examples of Hillel and Shammai on the one hand and Korach on the other hand. There's a very interesting note as well that I took from a rabbi called Shimon Shkop. It says in Bamidbar, it says there will never be a dispute again in all of history like the dispute between Korach and Moshe. And he says, how's that true? There have been so many disputes across history. And he says that this was the only time when Moshe was 100% correct and Korach was 100% incorrect. He was 100% wrong, and he was completely unjustified to take the position that he had. But in all other disputes, it's not 100% one way or the other. That means there's always things that we need to consider, and always adjustments and what's the word? Not consideration. Concessions. Pardon me? I was going to use the word concessions. That in all other subsequent disputes, we have to be mindful and appreciative that that even if we would invoke that Hashem wants things a certain way, we just have to be mindful and considerate of how we leave any conversation and any confrontation with another person, and make sure that where we are coming from is with the best intentions, and that we want to, that we certainly in relationships with people that we love and admire, that we want them to end well, and that we want to not have to sever ties because we've taken a particular position and stuck our guns and all the rest of it. So that sometimes that can be over brown shoes and ice cream flavors. We just got to, Joy.
You've just kind of squashed what I was going to say, because the thing here is for the sake of heaven, and I don't think it refers to which ice cream flavour is the best or anything like that. I think it's kind of loftier things, loftier discussions, and the way we deal with the minor discussions, or it may not even be minor, but I end up slamming the door. But that's something. It's a lesson that we have to learn ourselves. In other words, it's not really for the sake of heaven. It's
the two human people having an argument.
Yeah.
About civility. but this invokes something different, but one that is not for the sake of heaven. I would have a little bit of difficulty thinking that it isn't exactly what it says on the page. So it's a good job you've explained it.
So I do think you're right fundamentally. I think when the rabbis were discussing this and bringing this as their, moral philosophy, they would have certainly been coming from, we're all sitting in the base of Medrash over here, and therefore that's the context that we're talking about. But I think with all of these things, we also want to find the nuggets of wisdom that apply to people who are not sitting in the Beit HaMidrash all day. And so I think that it does have broader applications as well. I wasn't, God forbid, trying to squash you. I think fundamentally you're right. That's what the Mishnah is talking about. That it's talking about Talmudic disputes or halachic disputes. But not everybody in 2021 is like us, sitting on Zoom or in a base of Medrash, having Torah disputes.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I must say,
I know you don't believe it, Paul. But...
I've had a few discussions with my grandson. He's 23 now, but always I listen respectfully to his views, his scientific views, and then he asks me about my faith, and I tell him why, things that have happened to me and why. But we've never ever had any animosity or any real anger. It's just to listen to each other, and that's it. And I just think he's at that stage. That's what he wants to believe. I don't feel a bit sad, but that's what. It's his life, not mine, and he'll learn, because it's like being in the kindergarten with faith, isn't it? You're all at different levels, and some people it's just not for them at this moment, but they're all learning.
Josephine,
what's his name?
Josephine.
Paul.
If I was to ask you, how many people do you think have been killed in the name of Hashem?
Oh, too many, I think.
Really?
Yes.
He seems to be on everybody's side. Everybody's side, whether you're...
Yes, so they would say, well, the Muslims are blowing up, whatever. They're
God is great. Let me pull this pin out of the...
Not in that way, I'm not saying. I think we're only responsible for our own behaviour and how we treat other people that we come into contact with. We can't be responsible for the world. We're only responsible for ourselves. And I've said it before, I think one of in the Pirkei, as the rabbis say, if you have a good heart, that overrules everything, then you cannot go wrong. That's
lovely sentiment.
Absolutely.
It's true. That's the only thing, because as the Beatles say, all you need is love. That's what the Beatles say.
And a large mortgage.
Paul, what you just said there also just resonated with me. I have a note from Rav Yisrael Salanta, who says that one must always be certain that one's l'shem shamayim is l'shem shamayim.
Yes. Absolutely.
Absolutely. We can get it wrong, and we can be obscure, and we can say that I'm speaking in the name of Hashem, but listen, Hashem's got one way. And it's our job to figure out what that one way is. And there will be people who will invoke the name of God, as you said, and it will be done inappropriately, not with, not l'shem shamayim at all, not what he had in mind.
Absolutely. No.
And you're right.
Goes without saying. I just use it as a... So many people I come across, especially in politics, in the world, use this thing about he's on our side.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, in a war, both sides pray, don't they? They're both about to kill each other. They both ask God to help.
Absolutely. In the First World War, in the trenches, they stopped firing for a period of time so that the church and the religious, they could pray. And the same goes on now, right the way through Parliament.
Yeah. Oh dear.
Well, that's a depressing end to what's been a very enjoyable...
It's not present. We have to.
But to all those watching on Zoom and on Facebook, we are going to bid you farewell and thank you all so much for joining us. And you can carry on schmoozing on the live stream on Zoom. But for now, we wish you Shabbat Shalom for when it comes and a wonderful and meaningful day.